there's a bit of a trap that a lot of people fall into where we have a perception of something being a good thing for us, but never really taken the time to understand ourselves enough and what the good, the bad, the average, the ordinary, the ugly is as a result of the choices that we're making. Perhaps it doesn't bother some people as much as it would have bothered me. But the thing that was the top priority in my life at the time was like, right, what's the fastest way that I can make some money here, as opposed to what aligns to my values and is going to bring me the most joy and add some usefulness to the world. It's a really, really bad thing to define as a goal. It should be an outcome of doing something which is a combination of you enjoying it, you learning from it and growing from it, adding demonstrable value to the world as a result of it. Like, it genuinely saddens me to think that there'll probably be people listening to this that are doing things that they don't want to do with the time that they've been blessed with on this earth, which is beautiful. It's a funny one. I'll ask you a question if that's okay.
James, welcome to the show. We made it through all the different time zone challenges, the technical difficulties, and we're ready to rumble.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Better late than never, as they say.
That's
better
it.
late than never. Yeah.
And I know you're at a time in a period with your different businesses where there's a lot going on, but I want to go back before that. I want to talk about what life was like when you were playing poker, of all things.
Poker days were great back in the day. Yeah, interesting. I was actually living with a couple of poker players recently, and things are very different now in the online poker scene. It used to be much easier to make some money doing it, and it's a very, very hard way to make a living these days. Like, the level of detail that those guys um, go into compared to what it used to be, let's say, nearly 20 years ago. We're knocking the door of 20 years ago when online poker was first a thing. And it used to be the case that if you were fairly good at maths and numbers and stats, and you can read people quite well, and you can, face to face, throw people the wrong way, or throw them some misinformation, that it was a little bit easier because there's this big boom. And so I was there at the start of this boom, and I was playing a little bit when I was at university, and started doing all right. Won a few games. I thought there's something in this. Won a few more games, and so you start increasing the stakes and understanding a bit more about your game. Um, and obviously back then, it's pretty my risk tolerance would have been a little bit lower in terms of the sorts of stakes that I would have wanted to have played in. But I would have done like relatively low buy-in, or I always did tournament games. I did cash games. A lot of the pros these days are playing cash games as their bread and butter, and they'll be going off and doing some tournaments sort of here and there. But I wouldn't fancy going into that industry now as a young pro. I think that it's really fierce competition, really, really fierce. So
How seriously did you take it post-university?
for me, I actually really considered it as a can I do this? And I think the answer, but I often think I could have done lots of things. I think I probably could have been a sportsman in another life. Um, and I think I thought that I could have done, and I had a series of pretty bad. Looking back, they were really bad beats in a row. And like, little do I know now, the way that lots of the poker guys structure themselves is that they will take, stakes in a few of their friends, or have bigger backers that will, own 10, 20, 30, 50, 70% of their pots. Sorry, of their the entirety of what they're betting. Um, so which is, you're mitigating your risk. So you've got you know you've got your resources spread amongst several players. Whereas now, that's for me at the time, a few bad beats in a row, and I thought, hang on, what am I doing here? So I would have been 21. I think I would have been about 21. And I thought I was better than good. I was really good. I was winning lots of tournaments, making good money doing it. And I thought, is this is this something that can be pursued professionally? And you've got to balance the risk with all these things. And the risk averse option was that no, it's not. It's not something that I could do professionally. But I think had I been, which is what happens, I'm mates with groups of these guys that are playing poker. If you're in an environment where you're uh, working together and sharing information, not in-game information, but strategies for how to improve, certain types of reading, or whatever it might be. So if you immerse yourself in it and you're surrounded by it, which I wasn't, then yeah, possibly, definitely in a parallel universe, I'm still playing, probably world champion somewhere in a parallel universe. But there we
Yeah,
go.
and you're completely right when it comes to that network effect. Like, look at there's the whole classic self development. You are the sum of the five people you spend the most time around. If you were immersed in a poker playing environment where everyone was trying to level up and work on things, you're probably going to end up that way. In the same way, a lot of the people I've become close through doing the podcast over the last 3 years, it's made me more entrepreneurial. The people that I've grown up around are very into their health and their fitness. Best believe that's a big priority of mine as well. Now, don't get me wrong, there's certain elements where I'm drawn towards that kind of crowd. And I'm sure that's the same for some of the things that you'll find in your life, James. But when you're not surrounded by that and other people are, then you don't give yourself the best or the same chance as them of success.
It's a huge advantage. It's a huge advantage, and but that echoes not just in the so, like very much so for like living environments, and you find it now with especially a lot of young men, like in entrepreneurs. They will be doing much like I'm doing, moving around from place to place, but in a group of three or four that are all focusing on D2C brands or focusing whatever their niche is, and that becomes their support network, idea bouncing, keeping each other accountable, pushing each other to do better, right?
The
Um,
word tribe is what comes up for me when I think of that.
it is, yeah, it is really, and you've got to be careful in any scenario. You only get so much time to do things with in our lives, and you've got to be very careful with uh, where you spend it and what you spend it doing and who you spend it with, because it will all have an impact on you today and next month and next year. And uh, yeah, I mean, interestingly, like I'm, for a work perspective, I'm somebody that works. Typically, I work best in isolation, which sounds a bit weird. Like I need to like detach myself from everything, and that's where I'll hit like the deepest amount of flow with whatever work I'm doing, or certainly where my creativity will be best. It's when I'm isolated and I have time to like really think about stuff. Um, and I've obviously tested them out before. I've never been a fan of co-working type environments. Of course, places that I would go to, there's lots of these co-working type places. Some people it works for, and some people it doesn't. I just find from a productivity perspective, uh, the less distractions, the better. I'd rather be somewhere, um, very peaceful, and I use, different types of music to uh, reach different types of mood depending on what work I might be doing, and yeah, but it's personal. It's personal preference, right? It's personal
Understanding
preference.
yourself is so vital. And the way you talk now, you clearly understand yourself. You even speak about your poker days where you're like, oh, my risk tolerance or my risk adversity was at a different level then. Where is it at post poker? Like, how did you move into a sector that's as sort of, I don't want to say basic, but as traditional as banking of all places when you were a bit of a maverick if you're working in or trying to be a full time poker player?
Um, I think it comes down to not really, and I think there's a real danger here for young people. I always speak as if I'm like speaking to like my past self in lots of ways. So, but I think there's a real danger amongst a lot of young people where they are not quite sure. necessarily of what what they might want to do. And I think if you're training, as a doctor, if you're studying medicine, or if you're studying law, or if you're very fixed and certain about the thing that you think you might want to do, then in a way that's a very advantageous position to be in, because if you know what you're aiming at, then you can take your best shot. But I think quite a lot of people, certainly I can only speak for myself here, I was never quite sure what it was that I wanted to do. Any of the traditional sort of careers that I might have seen ahead of me were never particularly interesting. The only thing that was actually relatively interesting for me was the armed forces. Actually, I thought that would be interesting. Um, but I think there's a bit of a trap that that a lot of people fall into, where we have a perception of something being a good thing for us, but we've never really taken the time to understand ourselves enough, and what the good, the bad, the average, the ordinary, the ugly is as a result of the choices that we're making. Um, which are quite formative and shape the direction of us and onto it. And it can be very difficult for people to pivot out of
Choices that they've
these
made.
scenarios. And it's a funny one. I'll ask you a question if that's okay. I did say, I said, but I think it was last night. You text me. So we were on the text last night, or on the WhatsApp. So you need to WhatsApp me, because I won't bloody respond to anything otherwise. So, but I said, like, I'm really impressed with what you're doing, and the thing that impresses me about it the most is that you're doing it in addition to um, you're leveling up a skill in something that's of interest to you, with a view of it eventually, hopefully, becoming um, uh, a very good revenue generating piece for yourself, presumably. And having anyone that's got the get up and go to do above and beyond what would be considered an ordinary amount of work, um, particularly when it's in an area of focus which they've identified as something where they want to learn and grow and all the rest of it. I think that it's just totally commendable. So I meant what I said last night in those special, like maximum.
Yeah,
I think it was like maximum 30. So yeah,
yeah. Thank you for that. I really do appreciate it, and I think a lot of that does come from the self awareness that you're speaking about when you're talking about how you choose to work and optimize your life and the different ways that you get into a flow. When you pause and you do that work to understand how you're wired and what you might succeed within or what you might perform at your best within, it really unlocks a lot of things within you. And I guess if I'm going to speak about the podcast, I knew that I could communicate well. I knew that I could ask questions. I work in sales for a living. It pays to be able to understand what somebody said and then bring forth your analysis of that and then route them towards a solution that's either shared, or you can walk away and say that we're not going to work together. And I thought, you know what? I think I could contribute in this space. And I've got a tremendous curiosity to learn from people. Don't get me wrong, not every topic. There's particular guests and topics that I would never have on the podcast because it doesn't align with my interests or the interests that serve my audience. But there's a phrase that keeps coming back to me, and it's the tools will be heavy, but they'll feel light in your hands. And I really feel that way about the podcast because you've been on my friend Darren Lee's show, and he probably shared with you, I think probably during the episode you did with him, he shares it a lot, and I've shared it a lot too. 90% of podcasts don't make it past episode 10. And then another 90 odd percent of the ones that do fail before episode 20. So people don't do well in this space. And without being rude to a lot of podcasters, even the ones that make it past, they don't improve over time. But I'm 200 odd episodes in and I'm getting better. I'm having more in-depth conversations. I'm bringing more of my guests and I'm just continuing to level up. But I'm not in a rush to do it, which I think is one of the key things. Like I'm just enjoying the process and just working through it.
there's a lot to be said for patience these days, and it's actually on our it's actually honestly it's been on our roadmap. Probably, there'll be people in my team watching this and be like, "Oh God, I've been telling him to do this for ages." But it's in the roadmap from a marketing perspective for me to be doing a podcast and to be documenting the things that I'm working on, and be, done quite a lot of interesting things, and building some quite unique stuff. And it's on the roadmap for me. This is why I've got this microphone, and why I've been faffing around with the camera for the first 5 minutes before we went on air and all the rest of it. But it's in the roadmap to do it. I dissected with Darren, actually, looking through, how it all fits together, how it works, how the flow of it might work, and actually did quite um, had an interesting look at, it's not really just like topics that you might want to speak about, but it's like, like what's the why, like why are you doing stuff? And I think if you ultimately, you can always treat it as an incredible learning experience, like great, like networking thing. You never know who might see something and be like, that guy, I want to have a chat with them. But you'll just discover. I think if you can discover so much about yourself, and what's sort of become apparent to me, in the sleep space, in the sleep health space, in the wellness space generally. There's a hell of a lot of learning for me to do there, and probably one of the best ways to do that is to speak to uh, the right people who are much more highly qualified than I am, and to start producing some interesting content, not for the sake of producing content, but for you'd hope that you're adding some value to people's lives, as a result of it afterwards, right?
It's a
So
win-win situation, and that's what should always be trying to generate, particularly with content. If you can, as the creator, benefit from it from like a personal knowledge perspective or a network perspective, fantastic. But the audience that listen, if they're spending an hour a week listening to you or reading your blog or whatever it is that you've created, then they should be getting something at the other end of it. And I think it's a really important razor to use when you're creating anything. Like, does this grow corn, or does this do the job that it's intended to do?
uh, yeah, I mean, so did you have a very clearly defined goal when you set out on this journey of 200 podcasts, or has it changed and it's become something different, or
No,
how's that
that's
look
a really
like
good
for you?
question. The origin story of it is that I grew a following creating fitness content primarily between 2017 and 2019 on Instagram.
Yeah.
I got the deals with My Protein and Muscle Food, and I've built a good physique, and I was always sharing that I was traveling with work and doing my sales career, and people were just interested in how on earth do you balance both. So I appeared as a guest on a few different shows. I think I maybe did 5 or 6 in 2019. And after each one, I'm sharing it to my Instagram story, or I'm sharing like a little thing on my grid saying, I've just been on this podcast, go and listen. And the feedback I was getting from my audience was really, really strong. Like, oh, I really enjoyed hearing you talk about these things. And then paired with what I was saying earlier about, as a salesperson, like cold contacting an MD or an FD of a company and then pitching them and understanding their situation, asking them questions, having like funnels to funnel them towards particular things that I wanted to talk about. It overlapped quite nicely. So I really just thought, rather than me spend a lot of time going the way that Instagram was going with like dancing reels and pointing to things or selling out in a way that I wouldn't be comfortable with, I was like, why don't I spend more of the time having these conversations? And I was always an avid podcast listener as well, which I think when you're inspired by something that you watch a lot of or listen to a lot of, I would much rather be a creator than just a consumer. In some things, in some regards, like, don't get me wrong, there's some sports that I'll always just be consuming. I won't be a creator, but I certainly was keen to explore and create when it came to the podcast world.
That's cool. Yeah, it makes me feel
I lost you a little bit there, James, but I'm back now.
yeah, makes me feel even more so that I need to get on it and start having some of these conversations that I've been saying that I'll have for a while. So yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really powerful, and I love getting into people's stories. And when I was learning about yours, the thing that struck me was that you had a successful career in banking for a period of time as well. Like, I see a lot of entrepreneurs go into the corporate world for a very short period, get burnt, and leave immediately. But for you to develop a career over 10 years in the city, there's a more of a case of you potentially being institutionalized. How did you manage to free yourself?
I think that there's a real danger of everyone becoming extremely institutionalized with whatever field that they might be they might be working in. And the way this is the sort of the way that I would look at it, right? So you build so the company. There's another one now. There's two that are being built. Before they existed, there was nothing. So you've from scratch, you can create what your perception of, you know, normal behaviors, normal culture, um, ways of thinking, etc. So you can build those things from scratch. If you're in any, you know, even like a small and mid-sized, but particularly big corporate, there's very clearly defined do's and do nots, and uh, there's a risk, you know, much like we discussed earlier. The five people that you spend the most time with, you'll become like the sum of them, right? Or, you know, I don't know the exact words, but you know what I'm referring to, right? Um, in these great big places, or even if there's, you know, sub teams within these great big places, you really have to question like how what are the chances that the values, the ways of working, the net outputs of the things that you're doing from being there, how closely are they aligned to your values as a human? Because you're going to spend an awful lot of time doing that, and I think uh, perhaps it doesn't bother some people as much as it would have bothered me. Um, you know, above all else, I value freedom above all else. So freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. You know, you should you know, but by and large, if you're not hurting anyone else, you're not upsetting anyone else. By and large, you know, you should really be able to go and do whatever you want to do. And I think there's certain norms, should we say, within lots of organisations that never get challenged or questioned. And I would say that there's not always a total amount of um, reasonableness that's gone into the formation of what has become the norm in these places. It's just what's happened over such a long period of time. Um, so, but yeah, I mean, what I was doing never really felt very aligned. And sort of to go back to what you know, your question earlier, from like poker into banking, it's like, well, how did that happen? So I didn't, because I did not done any sort of self-assessment of myself. You don't know what you're doing, and you know, to be perfectly honest, the thought process was, what's the thing that I can do which is going to pay me the most money? Because the only thing that was um, uh, well, the thing that was the top priority in my life at the time was like, right, what's the fastest way that I can make some money here, as opposed to what aligns to my values and is going to bring me the most joy and add some usefulness to the world. And as you know, about fourth or fifth down the list is gonna pay me to do that thing.
Those are
So
huge questions to ask yourself. And I really feel there's an element of being railroaded at times or living on autopilot. And I think you can blame the system. I think, of course, you can. The education system, how it's structured, society, how it pressures us. But when you listen to somebody like yourself speak now, James, and you look at the different, like, clarity on your values and how you want to live, that is should be inspiration to other people to sometimes just unplug for a second, take some time, pause, ask those questions to yourself, and then assess from there. And I think it's only when you get stories like this that bring it to life, because there's the whole in sales, facts tell, stories sell. Your story is that you were plugged in for 10 years, pushing forward, pushing forward, pushing forward, feeling this niggle that it wasn't quite right. Probably the phrase that comes to mind is comfortably numb for a lot of people when they're in that sort of situation. You're earning enough money to shut up and suck it up and carry
Yep.
on. But there's a niggling thing in the back of your head, and it's only when you maybe take a momentary pause and you maybe explore things like side hustles. I know you dabbled with ecom briefly as well, and just see like what it might be like on the other side of the fence if I was to do my own thing, or even just change career as well, because you could have gone from banking to another career that lit you up in a way that the way your current business does. But it's only when you take those times to ask yourself some of those deeper questions, rather than, as you said, what's going to make me the most money? What's going to give me security from a financial perspective?
That 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 as a goal, if that is your like primary goal, I think it's a really bad thing to define as a goal. It should be an outcome of doing something which is a combination of you enjoying it, you learning from it and growing from it, uh, adding demonstrable value to the world as a result of it, adding demonstrable value to society in some way. Uh, e.g., is it is this in some way bringing me peace beyond just watching watching the bank balance rise? Because it, like if that is your primary goal, I don't think that you'll ever really be totally satisfied, and I think it will be something that really clouds your judgment. Um, so there we go. And this is just me speaking from just from my personal experience, but I think there's a lot of I don't think anyone will listen to this and think, God, James, what a great bloke, he's right, and go and hand the notice in or anything like that. But I think what would be wonderful uh, is if some people who might be a little bit um, younger in age or are financially secure. So, in terms of the risk that they're taking. So if you're in your mid 30s, 40s, family mortgage, blah, 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 it's very difficult to take certain types of risk, right? If you're in your early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, or whenever really, if you're prepared, to make enough sacrifice, um, which means uh, cutting back on all of your outgoings and expenses, taking time, staying with friends or family or whatever it might be to keep your living costs as low as you can be, um, and saying no to most things that you ordinarily want to say yes to, then you have a lot more money in your pocket and you might have some time to think about what you might like to do.
You buy
And
yourself the
interestingly,
opportunity to explore.
this is it. Interestingly as well, lots of people like myself, if you find a sensible way of messaging them or getting in touch with them, loads of them will be like myself. I'll be, yeah, sure, let's have a 20-minute, half an hour chat. Let's figure out what's going on, because there's a desire to see other humans prosper. Equally well, you get people who are of all ages that might be um, 50s, 60, people in the 50s, 60s starting new business and stuff like that. There's all sorts of ways to do it. But it sounds ridiculous, right? Like, it genuinely saddens me to think that there'll probably be people listening to this that are doing things that they don't want to do with the time that they've been blessed with on this earth, which is beautiful, and they're spending large portions of that time either doing things that not don't necessarily make them unhappy. Some of them might be doing things that make them unhappy, but they're certainly doing things that don't offer them any sense of fulfillment, contentment, or are aligned to the vision of their lives today or tomorrow. And
Agreed, James.
that's really what the sad thing is.
I've said this on numerous podcasts, and people like you would, of course, push me sometimes to question why I'm not doing the podcast or something full time that's in that area. And I can honestly tell you, I think one of the few areas that I've found fulfillment within the corporate world and the structure is in sales, because you can have a notable impact and your purpose is really clear. grow the revenue,
Yep.
win new customers, look after them. It's really easy for me to track that as a metric. And I do say this to a lot of young men that maybe feel lost, and there's been lots of guests that have advocated for this as well. If you are lost in like an operations role or a stock role or a product role and you're just not really getting it, go and do sales for a little bit, because probably what you're going to end up doing in terms of your own business, you probably need to be quite good at sales to some extent, because you're going to be selling at some point, whether it's voraciously as I'm doing with cold calls and emails and pitches and presentations, or whether it's just branding your product right and getting it in front of the right stores or whatever else you're doing. So I really think that there are opportunities to find purpose and fulfillment that are outside of what you're typically doing at this moment in time. And one of the things you mentioned, James, was like pausing and giving yourself that opportunity to decide if what you're doing is correct. Was there pivotal moments during your career where you did that, enable you to go all in when it came to ethical bedding?
Taking time to pause and reflect. No, I wouldn't say so. Not necessarily. I think I was very much on the hamster wheel, getting sort of ground down, you know, um, over a prolonged period of time, to the point at which I was like, this is not. There needs to be a change here in the way that I'm living, because this is not living. Like this is in no way, shape, or form of fulfilling or enjoyable um, uh, existence. So, um, but in terms of sort of self-assessment and self-awareness, I would say that that's probably only really become I'd say something of a skill in the last few years for me personally. And I don't know if that just comes with age or experience, or what it might be. Um, but yeah,
What enabled you
I
to
don't know if
take the
it's
leap?
what enabled me to take the leap. What and say I'm done. So there was let's say a side hustle business at the time, and I was thinking, okay, you know, this is. I saw there was an opportunity in e-commerce basically to make money, and um, there was the products at the time for that brand weren't really something that it didn't add any value to the world, um, or it certainly didn't uh, bring any. It brought people joy in their lives, presumably, you know, beyond the standard dopamine hit of ting, you've bought something, and oh, ring at the doorbell, here it is. Um, but what I wanted to do, and what I still want to do, um, is to do big stuff that transforms how people view themselves, how they view the world, um, in industries which are really big. So there's scope for huge scale in markets that are evergreen or are growing, and in ways that consistently give back to to nature, to the world, um, and to create things that are not necessarily new in the way, in terms of a, you know, a totally new product no one's ever thought of before. But there are a lot of things, a lot of products which can be improved upon if there is a little bit more thought that goes into them. Uh, so I was actually looking for. With that, I had there was one business already active, and I was looking to do something which would spread more kindness in the world. And I didn't know what, and I had no idea what it would be. And there were some third-party contractors in the this. I hate this. I'm avoiding saying the word side hustle because it's just like, but let's use it because in this like side hustle business. And I spoke to them and I said, there's not enough kindness in the world at all. Like that's like, there just isn't. This would have been around 2020, let's say, maybe like 2020, or maybe a touch before, maybe 2019, yeah, 2019, 2020. And I thought, I want to create something that just brings more joy and kindness in the world. I didn't know what it would be, and I spoke to loads of them. And let's say, like media buyers, email marketers, whatever it would be, your SEO guys, web devs. I'm like, look, it's going to be amazing. Like, let's all do it. Like, we're all just going to like work on it for nothing. And everyone was like, no, no, no. So I was like, right, okay, back to the drawing board. Um, but like these are the sort of this is like the this sort of like stuck with me. And I was looking, always just like looking for something, and I was looking for products which I knew uh, would be suitable in the UK market, which is the financial and legal system which I understand, and business environment I understand how to operate in. But that had some degree of success in different geographies. Um, and yeah, you're looking for something that's like super scalable, you know, different or better than competitors, high demand for it, um, and you can slowly start crossing things off the list, which you may or may not want to do. But bedding is one of those things, as you will attest to. This year, people will need it. Next year, people will need it. In 5 years' time, people will need it. In 10 years' time, people will need it. There's three beds on planet Earth for every one human. Now, of course, not everyone's in the market for some high end, uh, eucalyptus bedding or whatever it might be. Um, but there's a large enough market there that if you're delivering an excellent product within a brand that people feel an affinity to, that they will not just buy from you once, but they will become customers of yours for life, which means you can
And
kind of like roll this snowball down the hill, right?
momentum's a hell of a drug, and I completely agree. You did an assessment of was there enough to shoot at in terms of size of market, because you could
Yeah.
create a very niche product that ticked those ethical boxes for you in terms of the give back to people, to the planet, to the environment, to like culture overall. But if you did it in the wrong field, you wouldn't have the right amount of impact. It would be a very small ripple. Whereas if you do something that's, like you say, required in every household, then you are far more likely to have a positive impact as well. What were those early days like?
Um, Pretty boring actually. It depends what timeline you're looking at, but from the start, from the point of forming the company, there was a lot of mapping work. So there's a lot of looking back now. There's a lot of thinking, a lot of mapping, investigating textiles, sourcing suppliers, a hell of a lot of time in spreadsheets, figuring out which third parties we might need to come in and do different bits of work. I think the first iteration of the website I definitely would have done it myself. In fact, the first couple I did myself entirely. Uh, but the first like clunky bit of it, there's like just like lots of fiddly bits at the start to set up one of these businesses. It's funny actually, 'cause started another business about when I say started it, I've been thinking about it for a while, and then but did the setup process and got all the the lots of bits in the back end set up, and you can just sort of turn the handle now because you've done it so many times. You just sort of turn the handle, you know how to do it. But for yeah, I think for that one it was a bit more fiddly, and it was it was like I loved it. I loved the concept of the business from the get go. I loved the products. I'm very firm that I would, unless I would not just use a product myself, but be delighted to use a product. Like, wow, like I love this product. then you shouldn't really be. This is my opinion. You shouldn't really be selling it. And you only have to go on to lots of different places. Like let's just use Amazon as an example, and use lots of stuff on there. And you think that's just absolute junk. Like why are people buying it? Why are people making it? Like how are people proud of what they're doing here? So, but yeah, the early stages are always a bit sticky because you're committing cash to something which may or may not be successful. So the initial input to test whether the business was going to be feasible or not, from memory, it was about 50 grand. So it was about 50 grand, and the majority of that was because uh, you have to order quite a lot of the raw materials and the textiles. People don't want to take people don't want to make 100 pairs of pillowcases and see whether you're. Do you know what I mean? Like you're making stuff by ordering stuff by the ton,
Mm.
rather than as you know very well yourself. You're not going to get taken seriously
It's
if
a
you're not
volume
doing
game for these factories. They
big
need to
time,
realize that there's scale at the other end, because otherwise you're not going to make it.
big time. So So that was interesting. I've not told this story for a while actually. So the the early stages were it's fun, it's interesting, but it was very, very slow. It's very, very slow to roll products out. Obviously knew how to set up and do many of the things already. Uh, but the first batch of products failed. I wouldn't say catastrophic. Well, yeah, fairly catastrophically, to be honest.
What was the
They
problem?
were there was a chemical which wasn't added, um, or a chemical process which wasn't didn't take place at some point, um, uh, post, or when was it? Somewhere in the I need to look back through, but somewhere in the production process there was a something which didn't take place which needed to take place, and as a result of that not taking place, the um, the products began to fail, the fabric began to pile very badly, and it was just very weak. It was very weak, and they lasted for 3 or 4 months, and then they just started to bobble and bobble and bobble some more. And I remember it got to about January, I think I got the first email, and this and I and some and so, someone said, "Oh, it's really started to bobble, da 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 da." And I thought that's weird. I said, well, what are you? How have you washed it? What's the has it been washed too hot? Was it on a super fast spin? Like, what's gone on here? And then the second complaint came in, and the third. I thought, like we've actually got a bit of a situation here. This is not like user error. This is bad news. So eventually, we realised what had gone on, and it was I don't know if I can probably say this actually. Do you know what? I actually went to see them in Frankfurt at Heim Textile about a month or so ago. I was just snooping around. They didn't know who I was, and but anyway, yeah, so the company was making. So they manufactured for the white company, and they're pretty very very good at making linen, and they're very good at making organic cotton, and they've never done eucalyptus tensile before, and um, the the products failed, and they didn't want to take any accountability for it, and so it cost an awful lot of money to um, not only replace the inventory. It was like back to the drawing board in terms of finding a supplier, but also uh, outreach to the customers and explaining to them, what had gone on, and saying just sort of stick with us, like we good, you know, and had some issues with the product, and everything will be replaced if it begins to fail. But it will get done when it gets done, and not sooner. And the entirety of the inventory is not the it was not the current 3PL we're at, but the previous one. Um, that was donated to a hospice because they need loads of bedding at hospices. Was donated to a hospice, which was connected to somebody that worked in theirs mother. So yeah, I mean, very wobbly start in
I was going
terms
to
of,
say
you
a
know,
really challenging start, because when you've launched and you have made these sales and there's a demand for the product, you found a manufacturer that worked with the white company who's a leader in the space, albeit not with the same type of product as you. There's a relative level of reassurance that you've used someone that's credible. And then for that to fall down is a sore point, of course it is. But you said already, one of your highest values is kindness, and how you deal with
yeah.
a challenge for your customer experience. If we look at kindness as a value, you probably need to act in alignment with that. Or is it just words at that point in time? And I think for you to lose a pretty significant sum of money making it right would also win you customers for life potentially, but also sit better with you.
It comes down to it's in integrity for me, and it's like how would you want to be treated in that scenario? And as a customer, how what would your expectations be? And I think above all else, if you it's not reasonable to say one thing and do another thing. I think the world would be in a much uh, better uh, position these days if people's words match their actions. And sadly, when we live in a time where people say one thing and do another thing. And uh, above all else, if you say you're going to do something, you should do it. And unless there's absolute, disaster, and there's no way that you can do the thing that you've said that you're going to do. But even then, maybe you should think about what you say you're going to do if you're not going to do it. And but
I completely
that's
agree. One of the biggest challenges of the world now is it's more rewarding to be seen to do good than to actually do good. And that concept comes down to virtue signaling. So many people online will share the latest flag of a country that's in trouble, or they'll put like whatever banner up, or whatever day of the week it is, or whatever month of the year it is, to signal that they're virtue, that they're a good person. But if you look at their day-to-day life, are they living in alignment with those values, and are they putting good and joy into the world in the way that you would expect them to be if they're putting these things out there? And I often find, and this is maybe a political point, some of the most people who hold themselves up as the most progressive across all these things are also by far the most intolerant when you scratch beneath the surface, or you present a viewpoint that they're not comfortable with. And I've certainly found that online with any content of mine that's been like self-development based or whatever else as well, or like personal responsibility and value based. Sometimes if it goes beyond my audience in on TikTok or YouTube Shorts or whatever, the comment section of people who hold themselves up to be progressive and supportive and wholesome, oh my goodness, they do not like me or my guests one bit.
Oh, really? I don't know. I just very much of the opinion generally, like live and let live. You know, I wouldn't be worrying too much about bloody idiots commenting stuff on TikTok. But
It's
geez,
water off a duck's
anyone
back.
that's
You
right,
can't take it seriously.
anyone that's got enough time to be writing anything on TikTok in the first place, Christ, I wouldn't be taking that too seriously. Anyway, but yeah, it's a funny one. It's a funny one. I wouldn't, people do this virtue signaling thing. People do things like that. I don't know why. That's what brings them joy.
It's low
That's up to
cost.
them. Pardon?
It's very low cost and potentially high reward, because if you're seen as a good person, people treat you differently and they expect a higher standard of you. So, for example, because you own a business called Ethical Bedding, you are seen as somebody that is ethical, is moral, is good, and your products reflect that. That's fantastic. But somebody could just be like, oh, I'm an ethical bedding customer, but the rest of their life could be an absolute shit show in terms of how they actually behave. And that one thing that they've maybe held up online or posted on their Instagram story is designed to kind of cover their tracks elsewhere. And it's relatively low cost for them to do that. But what's high cost is to run a business that's in line with those principles, or to live a life that's virtuous and moral and good outside of that.
It's really, really hard. It's really, really hard to do it, and I don't, and I think it's a funny one actually because I do things which are within my um, ability to be able to help people, and I'd love to be able to do more. I really would love to be able to do more. You can't always do more, and you only have so much time, and there's only one of you. Um, but yeah, it's a real conflict for me in general. And I've had conflict about selling all sorts of different types of products just from a sustainability standpoint. And it's much easier to sell um, uh, junk stuff to people than it is to sell high quality, expensive product that costs more to manufacture. Raw materials cost more. People in the supply chain paid appropriately. um, Money donated to sustainability initiatives. It's really really difficult. But the one thing that is very good about my standpoint in this is that, not because this is not like a bedding related pun, but I sleep very well at night. I am a good sleeper anyway. I know I'm a good, the science of sleep. I'm all right at sleeping, but I know that I'm, living my life in alignment to what I have defined as my values to be. And uh, am I a saint? Is it could I always, do I live this Of course not. Like, let's be realistic. Of course not. Um, but do I make sure that I, treat people with respect and with integrity, and I'm mindful about, my consumption choices, um, mindful about uh, what waste I'm creating, mindful about how you make people feel. Like, absolutely. And I think that it's actually something that's it's become a little bit lost. It's become a little bit lost in society almost, whereby some of the things that I've just described there aren't necessarily uh, really the norm.
They're not common
and
practice now.
and I don't know what's gone wrong. And I see it as being more prevalent in the West. Actually, I spend quite a lot of time in Asia. I see it as being more prevalent in the West. And yeah, it's very
It's certainly a
it's
discussion
very
for another day, James, but my Christian friends would point to it's the loss of religion
Yep,
and structure and
yep,
focus on that. And while I am not a man of active faith, I was christened when I was a child, but I didn't grow up with attending church or having an active faith. But two of my friends in particular, both of who have appeared on the podcast, are born again Christians, and they fundamentally point to a loss of the
yep.
traditional Christian values that we have. And you mentioned the West. Best believe that's where it's become the most secular, because when you go to Asia, or when I spend time in Dubai, for example, a lot of these places remain faithful to the
Yep.
original faith that was of that land, and their value set largely, not in all cases, of course, appears to be a bit more intact and less watered down and corrupted. And that is certainly something that I've been thinking a lot about over the last 6 months in particular.
I think that there is quite a lot of truth in what you've just said there, and I'm not sure what the not just in terms of the giving people a guide for a value system which is over millennia proved and demonstrated to be a pretty reasonable way. You don't have to agree with everything in there, with every part of every religion or whatever it might be. But as a value set, it's a pretty good starting point. And as a method of um, having a functioning society whereby there's communities of people who are holding each other accountable for doing good things. I think if we're all doing our own things in isolation, and then that's where um, things
The
can get a little
cracks
bit
start to show.
confusing with
They really
derail.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of a challenge, perhaps not in society, but in a particular event of yours, how did the whole Dragon's Den thing come about?
Do you know what? I'm so bad at preparing for stuff, and I was like, I wonder what he's going to ask, and I'm like, I'll just get distracted and do something else instead. So I didn't even play it through in my head again. Uh, how did it come about? So where was I? I think was I in Spain? No, I think I was in. I think I was just back in the UK. I think I was just back from Latin America, and uh, my mother said you need to apply to go on Dragon's Den. I said, oh yeah, I mean I could do, yeah. And then a friend texted me, he said, hey, you should really apply to go on that. So I applied to go on, straight on the phone to me the next day. And then when was it filmed? Was it filmed quite long after? No, it's filmed in May. So I've been back in the country, let's say February. I think it was filmed in May of 2022 and screened in January 23. Um, but yeah, it's a great experience. It's a great experience. I think I'd probably have a slightly different um, approach going in there now than, but again, like hindsight's a wonderful thing. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's probably some really cool experience. The thing that I remember the most is that I've done some fairly unusual and interesting things in my lifetime, and so there aren't too many things that genuinely like give you this like huge exhilarating like rush of like nervousness or excitement, and so that was definitely very interesting. It's just quite a unique experience to go and do it. I think to be honest with you, I one-on-one conversations with you and yeah, I'm very comfortable with that. Some people are very good. Probably I would say you would be far better at this than I would be. Presenting things in front of a group, or speaking publicly, or things like this. That they're not things that particularly come very naturally to me, and they're certainly not things that I enjoy doing. And so I would have been very nervous actually before I went to go and do that. Um, because for some reason people think that I'm very outgoing. Don't know if it's the long hair or whatever it might be, or and I can be, but I'm actually a fairly introverted person with flashes of extroversion depending on who I'm around. But yeah, I mean it's a very interesting experience.
What stands out as one
Probably
of the biggest lessons? I've read some of your posts reflecting on it,
uh,
and I'm really interested to get into a few of them.
so the biggest lesson for me would be to um, which I've actually had to implement since. Well, I never didn't give you a briefing, did I, before we had a conversation? But it's make sure that you own the media, and or you own the edit, or you at least really highly trust the person that you're speaking to. Of course, long format's fine because you and I are having a chat and you can see what's going on and whatever else. Um, but the way that I was presented and the way that the edit went out was really not a very accurate representation of myself, of the brand that a lot of people had put a lot of time and money and effort into building. Um, a brand that had very shortly after that become an award-winning B Corporation and was a B Corporation at the time. And the way that I was framed in relation to the BBC, who are a quasi-governmental organisation and do have a responsibility to accurately represent people and things that are happening, which they sadly no longer uh, deem to be something that they is important to them. the way that I was represented in order to create a narrative and a story, like ex City banker, like boo, um, and anytime I would have stuttered during the presentation of the brand, anytime whether the timings of the way that things were chopped up was totally not the case whatsoever. Uh, the then basically the narrative that was presented was to create a storyline and to create some drama, as opposed to celebrating something which is actually quite an interesting, like a really interesting brand and a cool company that's trying to do something.
And when you
So,
consider that it was a 12-minute clip of you and the dragons, and the
yeah,
actual reality was 2+ hours you discussing with them, and
yeah,
as you say, the way it's cut for it to pick when you or you stumble or you pause, that's used to show uncertainty or lack of clarity, and people can love or loathe them. But Andrew Tate released what his footage of the BBC interview that he did post his release from prison, and he posted it against the BBC's cut of it. And there were times where they had cut in him pausing, and anyone, regardless of what you
yep.
think of Andrew Tate, knows that he is an incredibly precise speaker and presenter. And for somebody to try and present that in a different way was misleading. And as you said, the BBC, with its government funding, actually has a charter which dictates that it should not do that in any shape or form, and it should protect things almost verbatim.
I'll tell you what I use the BBC for now, to check the football results. Actually, they've got a decent weather app as well. But by and large, they're a total joke. And I'd say, and if you, but just for me personally, if I want to source news or information, then I'm very careful about how I do that, and I'm very careful about who I will listen to and um, take different pieces of information from. But irrespective of what I do or don't think about Andrew Tate, I think it's fairly safe to assume that probably what he said there is accurate. I know that um, pauses were put into what I was saying, stutters were put into what I was saying, the timing of when things were, the sequence of events of things that took place in there. Most disappointingly, actually, what was interesting is during the entirety of the clip, entirety of the 12 minutes, there was no focus whatsoever on the products, no focus whatsoever on the achievements or the successes. There was none of the conversations about going into the numbers, the size of the market, like all sorts of different things which you would expect to see, um, were just not there. So anyone who watched it would have been like, right, who's this prat on Dragon's Den, as opposed to, oh, I wonder what those products are. Ultimately, in the bigger picture, it's a good thing. It's a huge learning experience for me, and of course, there's this element of making sure that you own the media as well, that you're putting out from a long form perspective. Um, but I would question the issue. The issue with the BBC is that there's this perception that what they're saying is true and is a fair representation of the truth and is in some way accurate. Now, look, I'm just a fella selling bed sheets on the internet. If you want to make me look like a fucking idiot, go for it, right? That's all right. Don't worry about it. But what probably that is the tip of the iceberg of what else is not okay that they're doing. And I'm not like an investigative journalist. I don't really care that much. I'll just won't watch it. Like I say, I'll watch the football results. But by and large, I'd just be very, very mindful in general for anyone of what they're consuming in terms of media and where they're getting that information from. Because yeah, it's dangerous out there.
I'm on board entirely, and a lot of what they pushed around the C19 narrative was, and has now been shown to be potentially massively exaggerated to support a kind of project fear around the pandemic. And I think when you lose that level of trust with your audience, albeit only perhaps more the younger viewers, you're really going to struggle in future to collect things like the license fee or to gain the same viewing figures that you've had previously. One of the things that fascinated me about the way it was cut was, as you're saying, you really understood the market you were going into, and you looked at other countries where brands had done similar to you, albeit with maybe slightly different products, and grown, and you were trying to do the same in the UK, none of that was included. And instead, they spent time really probing your valuation. Now, having spoken to you and had this conversation, I know that you would have talked about the numbers in different regions and how that was all shaped in order to justify a valuation that you were working towards, as well as things like your sales and the potential to market and costs and all that other stuff that's important. But none of that was included, and instead it was an opportunity for them to like almost justify a really low ball offer that you eventually got.
Yeah, I think so. Lots of very sensible conversations happened about all of the different things that were happening in the business. Lots of sensible conversations about my experience. Uh, Interestingly, um, built a pretty strong rapport with most of them, um, and had a few laughs and jokes in there, and we were just having some sensible conversations really. And none of the sensible conversations were really included. And I remember before it would have been about half an hour before I went on for the filming, some sort of exec producer came and said, James, the Dragons like to invest between 60 and 70,000 pounds. I was like, okay. And also, I don't think that they'll like your valuation for the business. I was like, oh, okay. And I said, oh, well, you've had this info, you've had the, bearing in mind the due diligence process is crazy beforehand. I'm like, so you've had this information for whatever, like 4 or 5 months, no, 3 4 months. Um, so like, why are you presenting this to me now? Like, what's your understanding of what I'm doing? Like, who are you? What is your name? What's your credibility? What is this nonsense, basically? So, um, yeah, I mean, that was quite unsettling. But they weren't happy with the valuation, and to be honest with you, yeah, fine. Probably went in there a little bit punchy with the expectation for there to be some sort of negotiation in there, which is to be expected. But I had a line in the sand for what was there based on my determination of what sort of offer might come in. And there was only but anyway, I think it was miles off the pace, and I think like I don't know, I can't speak for other people, but I think the offer that was made, Tucker Sullivan probably wanted me to negotiate with him, um, but there was no. Uh, it's just at the end of the day, yeah, let's go full circle here. It's a game of poker, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like the pot's getting bigger, and you're like, right, what's going on here? Like, what's like, is there any sort of like value bet that I can make here? And I thought you've come in at such a shit price here, to be honest. And I would have done a deal at some level. I thought you've come in at such a shit price. You, with
How
all the
you
will in the
start
world,
negotiations really shows a level of respect, and
yeah,
150k for 50% was so far away from what you discussed at the start. It was to the point of being rude. So I actually really respected when you said, no, I'm okay, thank you very much, and called it at that point, because when you get on your knees in any circumstance, whether it's business or relationships or life, it's very hard to get back up. And I really don't believe that you should like bow down when somebody treats you with that level of disrespect. And I think to some extent, while he may have had an interest, I think some of that sometimes they're like encouraged to do these things for the camera, for the entertainment, to really lowball somebody when they maybe don't fully grasp it. And also, I was quite critical when I was watching it of how he talked about how he could generate the same level of like supplies and product with a really meager budget. And you just looked at him like, I really don't think that's the case. And like you managed to just about bite your tongue to not be like, fuck off.
yeah. Well, this is the thing actually. I've got a few mates that've been on there before as well, actually, and they know what I'm like. I don't suffer fools, and I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit if you've got 100 million in the bank. Couldn't give a crap. If we're having a conversation and you might know a bit more about this, and I might know a bit more about that, like, let's just like go at it and like problem solve in those ways and figure out what's going on. Um, but yeah, obviously, I think he's said a couple of things which were probably may have been for impact or slightly misjudged, but he did actually kind of get called out on them a little bit. And to be honest with you, it was a really enjoyable experience. Like I've got no ill will at all towards any of the dragons. Um, it was a very enjoyable experience. I would do it again. Um, the BBC are a fantastic organisation with lots of talented individuals. They always tell the truth, and they would in no way misrepresent anyone because they're such a wonderful bunch of blokes. So keep up the good work, BBC. Thank you.
Absolutely. When you bought the ethical bedding website domain, you bought a number of other ethical website domains. Why was that?
Mm. There's hundreds. And there's not hundreds. I think there's about, well, there is dot coms. There might be about, there's probably at least 70 dot coms, and there is God knows how many .co.uk's, but they're just to support because you have to sort of thing. But it's the .coms you want. Yeah, there's loads. And the reason why I did it is because I would like to create an ecosystem of businesses in this space that follow the same ethos and the same values, and people will hopefully build an affinity not only with the brand but begin to build an affinity with myself as I start to put myself out there a little bit more in different scenarios, in different places. One of them has actually begun to be executed upon, which is a really, really cool project. In fact, there's two, which one is very much all systems go and should be live. The thing is, I always say I'll be ready in March. It might not be. So it'd probably be April. So it's a supporting business for ethical bedding, which is called trading through ethicalcalm.com. And Ethical Calm is a sleep, breathwork, meditation, and sound therapy app with lots of different sleep stories, different types of meditation, things to help people understand more about their breathing, understand more about their bodies, about their sleep, the importance of it. And of course, it forms part of a wider sleep ecosystem. The third, so there's two parts of this sort of like sleep ecosystem that I'm looking at building. One of them's a little bit more complex. The app actually isn't that. It's a bit fiddly to do, but it should be. It's not. It's in my. We've got some good people working on it. We know we're going to deliver a very good product, right? So we've got the bedding. So we've got the physical product. We've got the app. We've got the digital product, and then I'm looking at ethical vitality as well, which is consumables. So there's lots of things that you can do with magnesium, glycine, and different types of supplement that
That would
typically
link to sleep
humans
health as well and improve it. Yeah, I love the synergy between all the different areas because it's so much easier to pivot, and the existing audience and customers are going to be interested in those products as well. And if you have a trust with you and the products that they bought within one brand, then the sister brand is an easy one to transfer across to. And I think that's a really interesting consideration to anyone listening about how you can potentially diversify your income streams within an existing business by launching more products off the side of it. There has to be that synergy that meets both your customers, your values, and of course, like the market has to bear it as well.
For me, it's really straightforward. It's an incredible to go from a physical product to a digital product. Incredibly natural progression. The consumables, the consumables is a bit more fiddly. So I've started to do a little bit of digging into it, and typically I don't, rule of thumb, if the perishable goods are a little bit more difficult in general, there's going to be different requirements and learning curve in that space entirely, which I'm not familiar with. Uh, the setup costs and getting to get a baseline product for a good price in the sleep space. E.g., can you get the MOQ high enough to get the price down low enough? You're probably looking at about 50 grand to build and roll out a brand. Now is not too bad for me to be able to do that. Some packaging requirements and um, uh, making sure that the team is doing what everyone knows what they should be doing, but the team are there already. I don't think it's that complicated, but it's only so much time that I have to do stuff. So I'm gonna wait. I'm kind of in my head. I said that I'd do those two this year, the digital product, the app, and the consumables. But I think I'm gonna kick the can down the road on the consumables, and I'm actually looking at. I'll tell you some of my best ones that I want to
Okay.
do. But so I'm looking at. I want to build a marketplace. I want to build a marketplace that has ethical beddings products. I'm also looking at doing. We now do bedroom furniture as well as the bedding, but I'm also looking at doing a whole range of home furnishings from bedroom, lounge, kitchen, bathroom, garden, the whole lot, as well as having the bedding on a marketplace. Building a native app which will be functioning as a sales channel through Shopify. Most of the types of brands that you'd want to have on there would be Shopify native brands, and finding a way of doing some sort of means test or some sort of like assessment of their credibility in terms of sustainability, environmental impact, ethical supply chain, people being paid appropriately, blah 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 blah, and bring in. I'd like to bring in 100, 200 brands, however many, and charge a sizable. I'm telling all my secrets here. You've got me telling you secrets, but like charge a commission off the top, so a dropship type model, whatever the percentage might be, but say around the 30% mark, and give, let's say, 5% of that back to good causes. So sustainability initiatives, education programs for children, humanitarian relief, whatever it might be. Um, Now, where that business model is interesting is that I can actually, much like the app, I can streamline a lot of the customers towards the app already. We've already paid to acquire those customers once, so it can be funneled towards the app, and much the same like one of these marketplaces. So if you consider that to acquire a customer, typically in the D2C space, if I can only speak for ourselves, but you're looking at somewhere in the region of, let's say, 25% to 40%, but that's, you don't really want to spend 40%. Let's say 25 to 30%, let's say, as a ballpark to acquire a customer as a percentage of total product cost, including uh, off the shelf price, so including taxes. If you have a suitable sales channel, which is wrapped up in a nice brand, has excellent customer service, has really, really cool products, and seamless customer experience with all the things they might be looking for in one place, then like I just think it's quite a nice thing to have, and it sort of exists in some guises already, but I don't think it's a particularly crowded marketplace. I don't think anybody that's in there currently is necessarily executing it as well as they could do. Sort of given lots of the barriers to entry, might be getting brands on board. Well, because of what we have with the bedding products and myself already, I can probably pick the phone up to people or just a little email. It's like, launching this. Are you in? Like, yeah, let's do it. Um,
You've done a lot
and
of the work already through your network. That's vital. You've got to take advantage of the reps that you've done prior.
yeah, yeah. I mean, in theory, it's not so difficult to do, and it's a case of making sure that it's operationally streamlined, and you've got the right people in who I've got a pretty good understanding of who they are already from the get go, in order to launch something like this, excellently. So instead of doing my consumables at the back end of this year, which I think might be a pain in the backside, I'm going to launch this. I'm going to launch this marketplace. So there we go. Heard it here
I'm,
first. That's happening.
I'm excited to see it, James, and I'm excited to see all the other things that you're going to work on. But one of the things that I want to think about, given the level of self awareness you've got and the level of different options you've got within the web of companies, in 10 years' time, what would you have to have achieved to look back on those 10 years as a success?
It wouldn't come down to anything. It wouldn't come down to a business metric. It would come down to, have I woken up naturally in a comfortable bed with sun with some natural sunlight? Have I been lucky enough to uh, take a good amount of exercise every day and nourish my body with healthy food, organic wherever possible? Have I been able to spend time with family, loved ones? Have I developed myself as a human being? Um, those are the more important metrics than purely business. I think from a business perspective, I've not actually set myself a goal from like a 10-year goal, for instance. I really actually haven't done that. It's a case of building. Um, but there's lots of big things that I'd like to bite off. There's industries that I see that are broken, and there's products that I see that are broken. For instance, I spend a lot of time traveling. The, the hotel booking industry is something which has sort of piqued my interest a little bit uh, recently. I'll tell you a story. So you look at booking.com. Of course, I own ethicalbooking.com. But if you look at booking.com, or if you look at Expedia, or if you look at any of these big boys, let's look at booking.com. So formed in Amsterdam, I believe, or certainly Netherlands in 1995, I think. You have to look this up. And so that was just when like the internet was just starting. So it was sort of the things. They probably spent 5 or 10 years flapping around, not knowing what the hell's going on, or I don't know. They're now doing twenty billion dollars revenue a year. Now, the interesting part is not that they're doing $20 billion revenue a year. The interesting part is that they're doing 5 billion net profit on that. Now, which is a huge amount. That's colossal. This is for a company which, let's say, have only been around for 20 years. Let's assume they spent 8 years flapping around. I've not looked at the numbers. I'm making some guesses. Um, and there might be 10 of these types of company of the top grossing. Now, what they do as well is they charge the hoteliers. I believe maybe someone will watch this and correct me. I don't know. But it's around the 20% mark that they're charging them, which is a huge amount. And so what I'm seeing a company that loads of people are using, which is probably like a bit of a benchmark in the industry in terms of what's netting at the end of the revenue, charging a huge amount for the people that are could be small B&Bs, they might be family run, they might also be big hotels, and they're making a huge amount of profit. That's a colossal amount of net profit to make. And I just think there's a way of doing it better, much like, with the marketplace that I'm building, and it's a finding the right type of like-minded people, whereby, for instance, you had a selection of hand-picked hotels, which might be only equate to 10 or 20% in any particular geography that you went to, that were recommended via this app, that charged the hotels or the B&Bs, whatever it might be, a much lower percentage, streamline the building of the tech and any of the ops behind the scenes. You can always do it way cheaper if you're designing it from scratch. You can do stuff better than if you're pegging things on. And use a huge portion of the profits of what would be in that company for sustainable tourism or regeneration of areas in places that need a little bit of help and don't have a lot of money filtered through to them in ways that you might like. There's lots of beautiful places all over the world, but there are some of them are they're often
Damaged.
not mistreated. Yeah, they're damaged. They're damaged, and for over 15 years, I've been traveling around over maybe 20. Yeah, I mean, nearly 20 years, I've been traveling around all over the place over the course of not always in sorts of ways that I do now. But I've seen the pace of change and the destruction in lots and lots and lots of different places due to mass tourism. And the airlines aren't taking accountability for it. The hotels sometimes are, sometimes aren't. Sometimes tour operators are, or if, for instance, if you were scuba diving, then the scuba shop might put some money towards regeneration of corals or whatever it might be. But typically speaking, there's not enough accountability in there. And it's just any industry I see where I'm like, there's loads of money in that, and it's not quite being done right. And there's an opportunity to, if there's a super normal amount of money being made, it means that you've got more to give. So if you do it better, and then you can give some of this money back to people that need it more than you might need it yourself, right? That's what life is. That is
It gets
literally like that's what we're supposed to be doing.
it gets your business mind firing in line with the values that you've got, and then you set off on the mission to do it. And I think that's an exciting place to be in. Like you said, you sleep soundly, but it also will be a driver throughout the day in terms of, look, I'm working on this. I really care about this. Let's go. And I think that's a great position for anyone in their life to get towards, James. And I really, when I think about that, I just think like I can see why you're fired up.
I love it. It's just there's so much opportunity, and things are changing so quickly. There's a hell of a lot of more enablement through technology now than there ever used to be before. So bringing ideas into realization, particularly in sort of scalable tech solutions, is super easy, right? Physical product businesses are really quite tricky compared, and I love physical product businesses, but they're really quite tricky compared to other things. So yeah, no, we'll see. But I've got a list as long as your arm of stuff that I'd love to do. But it's having the time, and not just having the time, it's having the financial resources and the mental space to be able to execute upon them, which means building a proper team that's embedded and trusted and everyone knows what they're doing. So things are at a point where I don't need to have my head in them all the time. Um, and it takes time. It takes time, and it's bloody hard building businesses when it's constant recession, whatever they're calling it these days.
Understood entirely, James. And I've loved hearing about it. I'm sure we're going to get the opportunity to chat again in future, hopefully in person next time. If people want to continue the conversation with you, where should they head towards?
Go to LinkedIn, type in James Higgins ethical bedding. You can message me on there, and I will certainly reply to you on there. If you can find me on Instagram, but rather embarrassingly, I'm not quite sure how it works yet still. So my tag or whatever it's called is in bed with James. So you can get in touch with me or email me, james@ethicalbedding.com. You'll find a way.
I'll
You'll
put all
find a way of
three of
getting
those
me.
in the show notes, James. James, thank you so much to you, and thank you to you, the listener. I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.